Welcome. Today we're going to talk about the weapons that were used by the Mormon Battalion volunteers. For the most part, the Mormon Battalion were issued the same weapons that were being issued to the regular infantry troops and other volunteers. There were a couple of options available at the time. The Model 1816 Flintlock was the primary weapon used during the Mexican War. There had been just over 900,000 of these produced prior to the Mexican War, so there were a lot of them available. We have three examples of the Model 1816. Now, over the years, there have been different date designations given to the Model 1816. Sometimes you'll see the Model 1821, sometimes Model 1822. And the reasons for some of these discrepancies into the date of the model were there were a couple of changes made to the Model 1816 during its production years. And so during those production years there were other references. Today, most historians and gun enthusiasts have settled in on the Model 1816 types 1, 2, and 3. And what we do have examples of Type 1, Type 2, and Type 3. And to the ordinary person, they have no idea which one's which. There's some very minor differences. Let's discuss those really quickly. In the Type 1, there is one primary difference that distinguishes from the others, and that's in that the sling swivel, instead of coming off of the trigger guard, it's forward of the trigger guard. You can see that right here. So that is the primary difference between a Type 1 and the other two. A Type 1 also had a very slight difference in the size of the lock plate. The Type 1, the barrel was issued in its bright form, meaning it did not have any browning, so it was just bright. Now in 1821, 1822, the change that was made was they moved the sling swivel into the trigger guard itself. So it's no longer forward of the trigger guard, and there's a slight change in the size of the lock plate. The third difference is the Type 2 was browned, which means it had a protective coating that the idea was to protect it from rusting. So that's the primary difference. Now, all of the battalion weapons that have provenance today, we know that they actually belong to a Mormon Battalion member. They are all of the Type 2 variety. Now, there's about 5 or 6 that we know about, and they're actually all dated 1827 and marked with Harper's Ferry. Now, that doesn't mean that all 500 members of the battalion received that specific date and arsenal. But the ones that we do know about, they are of the Type 2 variety. Now, around 1832, thereabouts, they made the third change, thus the Type 3. And the only difference between a Type 2 and a Type 3 is they went back to keeping the barrels bright. So they removed the browning and went back to the bright finish. So that's the only difference between a Type 2 and a Type 3. Now the final weapon that I have here is the Model 1842 infantry musket. It too, as the other weapons here, is smooth bore, which means it doesn't have any rifling in the musket. It fired a round ball. But the thing unique about the Model 1842 is it was the first percussion infantry weapon made by the U.S. arsenals. There were a few units that used those during the Mexican War. They were still in the process of producing these, but for the most part, the Model 1816 flintlocks were readily available. They had plenty of flints. to keep those operational. So most of the infantry units and volunteer units had the Model 1816. And one of the agreements that the Mormon Battalion volunteers had with the U.S. government was following their one-year enlistment, they would be allowed to keep their musket as well as their accoutrements. So that was one of the things that was given to the Mormon Battalion. Also, as we talked about when we talked about the equipment, the baldric, which held the bayonet scabbard, would carry the bayonet. This is the bayonet used for the Model 1816. You can see it comes up at a 90-degree angle. These were designed to slide on over the barrel. You've got your mortise here where it would lock into place when placed onto the end of the musket. So every soldier was also given a bayonet that would be carried, and then if needed they could place that on the end of their musket barrel. Okay, now I've removed the flintlocks and the Model 1842 musket, weapons generally issued to infantry soldiers, and have brought out 4 different models of rifles. Now, why are there rifles here? Rifles were usually given to riflemen or to light infantry troops. They're referred to as rifles because they're rifled. They generally fired a 54 caliber bullet. They were shorter in length, and they were designed for light infantry troops that had different duties. Now, what does that have to do with the Mormon Battalion? Well, the Mormon Battalion and other infantry units, sometimes when they were going on a long march, a few men would be designated as hunters. Their duties were to obtain meat for their men, and so there were a number of rifles that were issued. In the Company A returns, it specified the 4 rifles that were issued as being half-stock Harper's Ferry rifles. Well, there's only one rifle that actually fits that term, and that is the top one here. You can see they were all made at Harper's Ferry, so you have the Harper's Ferry markings, and you can see the primary difference between this and the other 3 is that it is a half stock. The stock does not go to the end of the barrel. So we know that 4 of these, this is the Model 1803 rifle, and 4 of them were issued to those assigned to be hunters. So the Model 1803 flintlock rifle was the first of the United States arsenal rifles that was produced. We have the others that were produced up to the Mexican War. We have the Model 1814, the Model 1817, and then we get to the first percussion rifle, which is the Model 1841. One thing in common with all the rifles is they all had a patch box, and they're all shorter in comparison to the infantry musket. The other rifle that we have indication that existed within the Mormon Battalion is the last one. It was actually Sergeant William Corey who made the comment a few of the hunters received the new cap-lock Jaeger, and the only weapon that fits that description, cap-lock, is the Model 1841. Jaeger is just a German term for a hunting rifle, and that's what these were being used by the Mormon Battalion. We don't know, we know that 4 men in Company A received the Model 1803. William Corey was in Company B, and he was referring to some of the men having the cap-lock Jaeger. It's unclear if they were men within his company, Company B, or what, but only Company A and D are the only 2 companies that we have information about what they were issued, and there is nothing in Company D that refers to any of those men being issued a rifle. So There could have been as few as, say, 8 or 12, or there could have been as many as 20 of these issued within the Mormon Battalion for the purpose of hunting. But we do know that at least 4 of the Model 18-3 were there, and at least a couple of the Model 1841 rifle, later became known as the Mississippi rifle. So the primary difference here, still 54 caliber, was it used percussion cap ignition system as opposed to the Flintlock. Okay, one other thing that differed between a rifle and a musket was the rifles were not designed to receive a bayonet. So the men that were issued the rifles, they had no a bayonet issued to them.